He was just a cleaning man, ignored by everyone in the company. No one listened to him, no one even looked at him, but what they didn't know was, he used to be the CEO who built this entire company from nothing. And now, he's watching it collapse from the shadows, because the same people who stole his company are about to repeat the same crime again. And this time, he's not staying silent anymore. That morning, Richard Hale moved through the glass corridors of Harrington Industries like a shadow no one bothered to notice. To everyone inside the building, he was just a janitor, an aging cleaner in a faded uniform, slowly pushing his cart from floor to floor. No one looked twice at him, no one asked questions. He was invisible in the most deliberate way a person could be ignored. Richard Hale was 62 years old. What the employees didn't know was that he had once stood at the very top of this company. He had been the CEO of Harrington Industries. Years ago, Richard was a completely different presence. Tall, composed, always sharply dressed, he carried authority without speaking loudly. People listened when he entered a room. He built the company from a small logistics startup into a global enterprise. He was known for being strict but visionary, a man who saw systems where others saw chaos. But power attracts betrayal, and eventually he was removed. Now he cleaned the same glass walls he once approved in design meetings. He walked through the executive floor he once controlled, and he watched strangers sit in offices that still carried traces of his decisions. In the executive conference room that morning, the current CEO, Victor Lang, was holding a meeting. Victor was in his mid-40s, tall, well-built, and always dressed in perfectly tailored dark suits. His appearance was polished, almost designed to project control. Unlike Richard, Victor's authority felt learned rather than earned, built through takeover rather than creation. Beneath his calm confidence, however, there was a constant pressure, as if he was always aware that his position might not be as stable as it appeared. Beside him stood Caleb Morgan, the CFO. He was a thin man in his early 50s, with sharp facial features, pale skin, and tired, calculating eyes. Caleb spoke carefully, always choosing words that sounded neutral but carried hidden weight. Over time, financial pressure and internal restructuring had made him cautious to the point of paranoia. As Richard passed by the glass wall, fragments of their conversation drifted out. Restructuring timelines, asset consolidation, internal audit suppression. Then Victor's voice became clearer. Make sure the original acquisition records cannot be traced back. Richard slowed his steps. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. They were not just managing the company, they were rewriting its history. Later, Richard encountered Ethan Cole, a young security guard in his late 20s. Ethan was tall and athletic, with short-cropped hair and an alert, slightly nervous expression. Unlike most employees, he still observed people instead of ignoring them. There was a quiet uncertainty in him, as if he often sensed problems but lacked the confidence to act on them. Ethan glanced at Richard's cleaning cart. "Morning." Richard gave a small nod. After a brief pause, Ethan asked, "You've been working here long?" A faint pause followed before Richard replied, "Long enough to remember things others forgot." Ethan didn't fully understand the answer, but something about it made him uneasy. And in the distance, behind layers of glass and power, Harrington Industries continued operating, unaware that the man they ignored had once built everything they now stood on. Richard Hale continued his work as if nothing had changed, pushing his cleaning cart through restricted hallways that most employees never had reason to enter. But unlike the others, he never seemed lost in the building. He moved with quiet certainty, as if every corridor still belonged to memory rather than permission. What no one noticed was that Richard often stopped near access terminals that should have required high-level clearance. Sometimes he simply stood there for a few seconds. Other times, the system screens flickered briefly after he passed. In the IT monitoring room, subtle inconsistencies began to appear. A small group of employees started noticing missing or altered internal files, expense reports, archived contracts, and restructuring documents that no longer matched previous versions. Nothing obvious at first, just slight discrepancies that could be dismissed as system updates. But they kept happening. One of the junior analysts, Jake Turner, began paying attention. Jake was in his mid-20s, slim, with messy blonde hair and a perpetually tired expression from long hours in front of screens. He was introverted but highly observant, the type who noticed patterns others ignored. His personality leaned cautious. He preferred data over assumptions, but data was now confusing him. He pulled up system logs, frowning. "Why are these files being accessed from internal maintenance nodes?" he muttered to himself. The access patterns didn't match any official IT workflow. At the same time, Richard was seen near a restricted server corridor on the lower executive floor. Ethan Cole, the young security guard, noticed it on a routine patrol. Ethan, tall and athletic with sharp eyes and a habit of constantly adjusting his uniform belt, hesitated when he saw Richard near the locked door. "Sir, that area requires clearance," Ethan said politely. Richard paused, holding his cleaning cloth. "I was told to clean this section." Ethan checked his tablet. No such request existed. But when he looked up again, Richard was already walking away. Later that evening, Jake reviewed another anomaly, this time involving a financial archive folder. The file had been modified, then restored, then partially erased again within a span of minutes. It was as if someone was editing history in real time. And the strangest part was the access signature. It didn't match any current employee credentials. It matched something older, something that no longer officially existed in the system. Meanwhile, Richard stood alone in a maintenance storage room, quietly observing a hidden service panel inside the wall. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he simply looked at it for a long moment, as if remembering a time when he didn't need permission to enter anywhere in the building. Far above him, the company continued its normal rhythm: meetings, emails, reports, completely unaware that its internal structure was beginning to shift in ways no one yet understood. And slowly, Jake began to realize something uncomfortable. These weren't random glitches. Someone inside the building knew exactly how the system worked, better than IT itself. Richard Hale continued his routine as if nothing in the building could touch him. The mop moved across polished floors, but his attention was no longer on dirt or dust. It was on memory. That afternoon, he passed the executive conference hall while a leadership meeting was underway. The glass walls were soundproof, but not invisible. Inside, the current CEO, Victor Lang, stood at the head of the table. Richard stopped. For a brief moment, everything around him seemed to fade. Victor's posture, the way he leaned slightly forward when speaking, even the controlled rhythm of his gestures, it triggered something buried deep inside Richard's mind. Not recognition in the present, but recognition from another time. A time when Richard himself had stood in that exact position. His grip on the cleaning cart tightened. For the first time in years, his expression changed, just slightly. Not anger, not surprise, something heavier. A fracture in composure. Inside the room, Victor Lang was in his element. He was a man in his mid-40s, tall, sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit that always looked flawless under any lighting. His voice carried authority, but it was a kind of authority built on control rather than creation. Years of corporate survival had shaped him into someone who trusted structure over emotion. But beneath that confidence, there was always calculation, like he was constantly defending a position he didn't fully own. Beside him sat Caleb Morgan, the CFO, a thin man in his early 50s with pale skin, sharp cheekbones, and restless eyes that rarely stayed still. Caleb had the demeanor of someone who had survived too many internal restructurings. He spoke carefully, as if every sentence had to pass through layers of self-protection before being spoken aloud. Richard's eyes lingered on them, and then, just for a second, he saw another image overlaid in his mind. Not Victor, not Caleb. A different boardroom, a different era. People standing around him calling him Sir. Then it was gone. Richard blinked once and turned away, continuing down the corridor, but something inside him had shifted. Meanwhile, in the IT department, Jake Turner was digging deeper than he should have been allowed to. Jake was in his mid-20s, slim, with messy blonde hair and tired eyes that had seen too many lines of code and not enough answers. He was naturally cautious, but curiosity always won over fear. He attempted to access archived personnel files labeled Legacy Executive Records. Access denied. He tried again using a different internal route. Denied again. A red warning flashed across his screen. Unauthorized attempt logged. Before he could react, a shadow fell across his workstation. A security guard stood behind him. Ethan Cole, early 30s, tall, athletic build, sharp jawline, and a firm but uneasy presence. Ethan was known for following rules strictly, but there was hesitation in his eyes today. "Stop," Ethan said quietly. Jake froze. "I'm just checking system inconsistencies." Ethan looked at the screen, then at Jake. "You're looking in places that are locked for a reason." Jake hesitated. "Or locked because someone doesn't want us to see them." Ethan didn't respond immediately. That silence said more than agreement or denial. Back in the hallway, Richard stood alone near a maintenance door, staring at it longer than necessary. His reflection in the metal surface looked older than he remembered. And for the first time, the past didn't feel buried. It felt close. Too close. The first sign of trouble wasn't loud. It was silent. At 8:17 a.m., Harrington Industries' internal finance dashboard began flashing inconsistencies. Small at first, adjusted figures, missing transaction references, and duplicate audit trails. But within minutes, the system flagged something serious. Entire sections of financial history had been accessed and copied externally. By 9 a.m., panic had already started spreading through the upper floors. Richard Hale continued his cleaning route as if nothing had changed. A janitor in his 60s, slow-moving, quiet, unremarkable. Gray hair, slightly bent posture, hands always steady. No one would ever suspect him of understanding corporate systems, let alone influencing them. But today, the building felt different. He could sense it in the way employees whispered in hallways, in the way managers moved faster than usual, in the way security cameras tilted slightly more toward the staff instead of the corridors. Something had been exposed. At the executive level, Victor Lang, the CEO, stood in the middle of a crisis meeting. He was a man in his mid-40s, tall, sharply dressed in a dark tailored suit, with perfectly controlled posture. Victor's leadership style was calm but rigid, shaped by years of corporate acquisition battles. However, today his calmness felt strained, like a mask under pressure. Beside him, Caleb Morgan, the CFO, reviewed system reports with shaking fingers. Caleb was thin, pale, and always slightly hunched over documents as if trying to hide inside them. His eyes moved too quickly, scanning every line for threats rather than information. "This isn't random," Caleb said quietly. "Someone extracted structured financial archives. Not a hack. A guided extraction." Victor narrowed his eyes. "Internal?" Caleb hesitated. "Possibly." That single word changed the atmosphere. Meanwhile, in the IT department, Jake Turner stared at his screen in disbelief. Jake, mid-20s, slim, messy blonde hair, always slightly tired from overthinking systems, had just received an anonymous email. No sender, no trace route, just one line. "He is not who they think he is." Jake frowned. He didn't like vague messages. They were noise disguised as warning. Before he could respond, another anomaly appeared in the system logs. Access patterns again. The same signature from previous incidents. Old, outdated credentials that should not have been active. Across the building, Richard paused briefly near a service elevator. A security camera above him slowly rotated, tracking movement. He noticed it, but didn't react. Instead, he continued walking. At that same moment, Victor Lang was reviewing live camera feeds. Something about the janitor had caught his attention in recent days. Not suspicion yet, just observation. But today, Victor didn't look away. He zoomed in slightly on Richard Hale. "Pull his employment file," Victor ordered. A nearby assistant, Lena Brooks, a woman in her early 30s with sharp features, tied-back black hair, and a highly disciplined, analytical demeanor, quickly typed into her terminal. Lena was known for her efficiency and emotional detachment. She trusted data more than intuition. After a few seconds, she frowned. "There's almost nothing," she said. "No background before his hiring date, just onboarding records." Victor's expression changed slightly. That wasn't normal. Back on the lower floors, Jake opened the email again. Something about it kept bothering him. He forwarded it to a secure analysis tool, trying to trace metadata. The result came back empty. But one thing stood out. The email had been routed internally, from within Harrington Industries itself. Jake leaned back slowly in his chair. "This isn't external," he whispered. And somewhere deep inside the building, Richard Hale continued walking through corridors filled with systems that were now beginning to react to his presence, as if the company itself was slowly remembering something it had tried to forget. The tension inside Harrington Industries had shifted from confusion to quiet fear. Files kept disappearing, employee records were being rewritten, entire sections of internal history were being silently adjusted as if the company itself was editing its own past. Richard Hale continued working as a janitor, but his presence now felt heavier than before. The way he moved through the corridors was still calm, still unassuming, but something about him no longer matched the image of a simple cleaning worker. In the IT department, Jake Turner had stopped treating the situation as a glitch. Jake, a slim man in his mid-20s with messy blonde hair and tired, focused eyes, had always relied on logic. But logic was now pointing toward something unsettling. The internal system wasn't just malfunctioning, it was protecting something. He dug deeper into legacy archives, bypassing several layers of restricted access using a sandbox terminal he wasn't supposed to use. That was when he found it. A fragmented personnel file labeled Executive Historical Index, Redacted. Most of the data was missing, but one line remained intact. Former Chief Executive Officer Richard Hale. Jake froze. For a moment, he thought it was a system error, a corrupted label, a false link between identities. But as he cross-checked archived financial records, the pattern became undeniable. Years ago, Harrington Industries had been founded and led by a man named Richard Hale. Expansion records, early investor documents, and initial IPO filings all confirmed it. The janitor walking the halls below was not just an employee, he was the original founder of the company. At the same time, deeper in the system, Jake uncovered something even more disturbing. There was a gap in the leadership timeline, a period where Richard Hale was abruptly removed from all official records. No resignation, no public announcement, just disappearance from corporate history. Instead, Victor Lang appeared in executive records shortly after. The transition was too clean, too controlled. It wasn't succession, it was replacement. Jake leaned back, heart pounding. "This wasn't a transition," he whispered. "It was an erasure." Meanwhile, Richard stood alone near a maintenance corridor, unaware that fragments of his past were surfacing inside the system he once built. His expression remained calm, but his eyes lingered longer on locked doors than before, as if he remembered what was behind them, even if he refused to acknowledge it. Jake made a decision. He created a hidden backup of everything he had found. Then he sent a single encrypted message through an internal ghost channel only he could access. To Richard Hale. No subject line, no explanation, just access credentials to the recovered files. At that moment, in a separate part of the building, Ethan Cole, the security guard, noticed unusual system activity. Ethan was in his early 30s, tall, athletic, with short cropped hair and a disciplined but increasingly uneasy demeanor. He had started questioning small inconsistencies in patrol logs and camera routing patterns. He paused at his terminal when he saw the alert, Unauthorized Historical Data Access, Executive Archive. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time, he didn't immediately report it. Because something about the pattern felt familiar. Like the system wasn't being hacked, it was being remembered. Upstairs, Victor Lang reviewed a quiet report showing increased internal data probing. His expression didn't change, but his fingers tapped once against the table. "Find who's digging into legacy records," he said calmly. Beside him, Caleb Morgan nodded, but hesitated for half a second too long before responding. And somewhere in the building, Richard Hale finally received the encrypted message. He stared at it for a long time. Then, without emotion, he opened it. Richard Hale stood alone in a dim maintenance room deep inside Harrington Industries, the fluorescent light above him flickering softly, as if the building itself was unstable. The encrypted message Jake had sent was still open on a secured terminal in front of him. For a long moment, Richard did not move. His face remained calm, but his eyes had changed. Not with surprise, but with recognition. as if pieces of a long-buried structure were finally being placed back into position. He entered the credentials. The system unlocked a hidden archive layer. What appeared was not just data, it was history. Financial records, internal transfers, and executive override logs dating back years, all stored in a segregated backup layer that had been intentionally hidden from standard IT visibility. And there it was, a sequence of transactions labeled under Strategic Acquisition Adjustment. Richard's expression tightened slightly. These were not adjustments, they were theft routes. Funds had been redirected through shell accounts, internal restructuring channels, and phantom vendors, all tied to a period shortly before his removal from leadership. The deeper he traced the chain, the clearer the pattern became. This was not mismanagement, it was controlled extraction. Someone had been draining the company from within while rewriting the official records to cover it up. Meanwhile, in the IT operations center, tension was rising. Lena Brooks, a senior system analyst in her early 30s with sharp eyes, tied-back black hair, and a calm but intimidating presence, was reviewing internal security alerts. Lena was known for her precision and strict adherence to protocol. She didn't believe in coincidences, only system failures or human interference. Trace all legacy access attempts, she ordered. Her team worked quickly, scanning logs. But something unusual appeared. The access signature kept looping back to maintenance-level permissions. That made no sense. Maintenance accounts did not have the ability to retrieve executive archives, unless someone had bypassed the hierarchy entirely. At the same time, Jake Turner sat in a smaller office under temporary restriction review. He was mid-20s, slim, messy blonde hair, and visibly stressed. His previous unauthorized access attempt had triggered internal flags. Across from him stood Ethan Cole, the security guard. Ethan, tall and athletic with short cropped hair and a firm jawline, looked conflicted. He had been assigned to monitor Jake, but his instincts were telling him something different from protocol. "You accessed restricted archives," Ethan said quietly. Jake didn't deny it. "Because something in there is being hidden." Ethan hesitated. "Or you're being set up." That possibility had not left Ethan's mind since the alerts began. Back inside the hidden system, Richard discovered something far worse than financial manipulation. A second layer of logs showed deliberate falsification of audit trails. Every time a suspicious transaction was recorded, a secondary script had overwritten the entry within seconds, replacing it with clean data. But the most disturbing detail was the signature. It matched a high-level executive credential. Not Victor Lang, not Caleb Morgan, but a third authority tag, one that had been partially erased but still echoed through system remnants. Richard closed his eyes for a brief moment. The company he built had not just been taken, it had been systematically rewritten by multiple hands. And someone had been very careful to ensure he was erased from all of it. Upstairs, Lena's team reported a new concern. "Internal breach activity is increasing," one technician said. "It's spreading across multiple departments." Lena narrowed her eyes. "Find the source." But even as she said it, she already suspected the truth. There was no single source. There was a structure behind it. And somewhere inside that structure, Richard Hale was no longer just observing. He was starting to respond. Inside a forgotten maintenance basement beneath Harrington Industries, Richard Hale stood over a dim table illuminated only by a portable lamp. The room smelled of dust, metal, and old wiring. This was not a place designed for meetings. It was a place designed to be ignored. Across from him sat Jake Turner. Jake, mid-20s, slim build, messy blonde hair, and tired but focused eyes, looked nothing like someone involved in corporate warfare. He was an IT analyst who had slowly crossed the line from observer to participant. Fear still lingered in his expression, but curiosity had already taken control. On the table between them were printed logs, extracted financial maps, and a reconstructed timeline of internal fraud. Each page represented a layer of truth the company had tried to bury. Richard spoke quietly, his voice steady but heavy with intent. "When we release this, there's no turning back." Jake nodded. "Then we make sure it reaches everyone at once." Richard didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reviewed the final structure of their plan. A synchronized release across internal communication channels, external audit networks, and backup media servers. Once triggered, the system would replicate the data faster than it could be deleted. At the same time, in the upper floors of Harrington Industries, the atmosphere had shifted. Victor Lang, the CEO, stood in a glass-walled office overlooking the city. He was in his mid-40s, tall, sharply dressed in a dark tailored suit, and always composed under pressure. But today, his calm felt tighter, like pressure building beneath a sealed surface. Beside him was Caleb Morgan, the CFO. Thin, pale, sharp-featured, with constantly shifting eyes that suggested calculation more than confidence. Caleb had begun to sense instability in the system, but not its origin. "We're seeing unauthorized structural access," Caleb said. Victor didn't turn. "Where?" "Legacy archives, financial override layers, internal routing systems." Victor finally looked over. "Trace it." Caleb hesitated. "We've tried. It keeps fragmenting. It's like the system is being accessed from multiple entry points simultaneously." That made Victor pause. Not fear, but irritation. Someone inside the company wasn't just stealing data. They were rebuilding it. Meanwhile, security operations were being escalated. Lena Brooks, early 30s, sharp-eyed, disciplined, and emotionally detached IT security lead, was overseeing lockdown protocols. She had begun to suspect that internal access wasn't coming from one compromised account, but from a coordinated system of old and hidden credentials. "Increase authentication layers on executive archives," she ordered. "But that will slow down internal operations," one technician warned. "Good," Lena replied. "Slower is safer." Elsewhere, Ethan Cole, the security guard, stood near a restricted elevator zone. Early 30s, athletic build, short-cropped hair, alert eyes, Ethan had always been loyal to protocol. But lately, protocol and reality were no longer aligned. He had reviewed Jake's case file again. Something didn't add up. A simple IT analyst shouldn't have access patterns matching legacy administrative pathways. Either Jake was guilty, or someone had planted him inside a system already compromised. Back in the basement, Richard activated a secure transmission node. "This is the final step," he said. Jake looked at him. "Once it goes live, they'll try to shut everything down." Richard's expression remained unchanged. "Let them try." For the first time, Jake realized something unsettling. This wasn't just about exposing corruption, it was about reclaiming something that had already been stolen long ago. And upstairs, Victor Lang received a silent alert. "System-wide data propagation detected." His expression darkened. "Lock the building down," he said. But it was already too late. The emergency boardroom meeting at Harrington Industries was supposed to be controlled, contained, and quiet. Instead, it became the moment the entire company collapsed into truth. Every executive floor screen had been overridden. Every internal monitor displayed the same frozen file: financial trails, hidden transactions, and the erased leadership history of Richard Hale. No one could stop the feed anymore. The system had already finished what it was designed to do: reveal everything at once. Richard Hale stood at the front of the main conference room. For the first time in years, he was not a janitor. He was exactly what he used to be. Richard, now fully revealed as the former CEO and founder, appeared older than his official records suggested, but his presence had returned in a way that filled the room completely. His posture was steady, his voice calm, but every word carried authority built from experience, not position. Across the table, Victor Lang, the current CEO, looked shaken for the first time. He was still tall, sharply dressed in a perfect dark suit, but his composure had cracked. Years of controlled leadership could not survive exposure to a truth that invalidated his entire rise. Caleb Morgan, the CFO, thin and pale with sharp, anxious eyes, was already sweating. His calculated calm had turned into visible panic as the financial records on every screen began mapping his involvement layer by layer. "This is not a misunderstanding," Richard said calmly. "This is a reconstruction of what you buried." Behind him stood Jake Turner. Jake, mid-20s, slim, messy blonde hair, exhausted but determined, looked nothing like a corporate insider. Yet he had become the key that unlocked everything. His role had shifted from observer to catalyst. Victor stepped forward. "You're just one man. You can't overturn an entire company structure like this." Richard looked at him quietly. "I didn't overturn it," he said. "I restored it." At that moment, Lena Brooks, the IT security lead in her early 30s with sharp eyes and tightly controlled professionalism, stood frozen at her terminal. She had tried everything to block the data stream, but it was no longer coming from a single point. It was already distributed across internal and external mirrors. The truth had escaped containment. Security personnel began receiving conflicting orders. Some systems locked down, others unlocked. The company was no longer under unified control. Ethan Cole, the security guard in his early 30s with an athletic build and conflicted expression, stood near the entrance watching everything unfold. He had been trained to follow protocol, but protocol had now become meaningless. He slowly lowered his hand from his radio, realizing there was nothing left to report that wasn't already known. Victor Lang tried one final attempt. "You were removed legally!" Richard's voice stayed calm. "No, I was erased illegally." A silence fell across the room. Then the system completed its final broadcast cycle. Every screen in the building displayed the same message. "Executive history restored. Origin CEO confirmed. Richard Hale." Caleb Morgan stepped back, defeated. "It's over." Victor didn't respond. There was nothing left to argue. Within hours, emergency shareholders convened. Investigations were launched. Evidence confirmed systematic fraud, falsified leadership transition, and internal financial extraction. Victor Lang was removed immediately. Caleb Morgan was suspended pending legal review. The entire executive structure collapsed under verified documentation. Richard did not celebrate. He simply watched as the company he built began returning to a form that resembled truth. In the days that followed, official statements restored Richard Hale's identity as founding CEO. His reputation was reinstated. Legal ownership structures were corrected. Harrington Industries entered full restructuring under transparent governance. Jake Turner was promoted within the IT and Forensic Audit Division for his role in exposing the corruption. For the first time in his career, he was not just an employee, he was trusted. As for Richard, when asked what he would do next, he only said, "Build it properly this time." And for the first time in years, Harrington Industries did not feel like a stolen legacy. It felt like a new beginning. So the truth finally came out. But was justice really served? Richard reclaimed everything he built, but at the cost of years of his life erased. Jake helped expose the corruption, but would you risk your entire career to do the same? And what about Victor Lang? Was he a pure villain, or just another man trapped in a system built before him? Now tell me, if you were Richard, would you reveal the truth and destroy everything? Or stay hidden and live in peace? If you were Jake, would you stay loyal to the system? Or betray it to expose the truth? And do you believe justice always wins? Or does power always rewrite the story? Comment your answer below. I want to know what you would choose in this situation. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful office drama stories every week. Your support helps bring more intense, shocking stories like this one.